Welcome to ABBY UK. Advocacy for British Hindus and Indians. ABBY UK, Advocacy for British Indians and Hindus is a unique platform that provides an opportunity for the community to engage with the policymakers and influencers to help shape and translate the voice of the community in the political discourse. ABBY UK aims to enable a two-way conversation between the community and the socio-political spectrum, through the medium of dialogue, discussion, advocacy and research. Today's program on the state of religious freedom and minorities in Pakistan is our inaugural initiative to raise awareness on this important subject and provide an opportunity for the policymakers to understand the situation of the minorities and help raise the pitch among the global polity to engage the government of Pakistan and remind it of its obligation towards its minorities. Do visit us on our website at www.abhiuk.org. Facebook abhiuk.fb, Twitter @abhiuk1, Instagram abhiuk.insta. Today's program is broadcast live on all these channels.
All right, welcome everybody to what we have planned as I think a very interesting discussion. And a very timely one. It was just reported today that archaeologists in Pakistan discovered a 1,700-year-old life-size statue of Buddha, which unfortunately was then destroyed on the orders of a local religious leader. So, bringing together this group today, my name is Seth Oldmixon, and I'm with Liberty South Asia. And I'll be facilitating and moderating this discussion with a great group of panelists, including Dr. Nick Evans from the London School of Economics, Farnaz Isfahani, Senior Fellow at the Religious Freedom Institute in Washington, D.C., and author of a fantastic book, Purifying the Land of the Pure. We're also joined by Dr. Rubina Greenwood, Chair of World Sindhi Congress, Dr. Waris Hussain, Adjunct Professor, Howard University School of Law, as well as three distinguished members of Parliament in the UK, Teresa Villers, and then we will be joined shortly by Mr. Jim Shannon and Jonathan Lord as well. So to get things started, I want to give each of our panelists a few minutes to set the tone, give an opening remarks. Ms. Isfahani, would you care to get us started here?
Sure. Thank you so much to ABBY UK and to Seth and everyone else here today. I'll tell you a quick little bit about my background so you can understand where I'm coming from. I was a member of parliament in Pakistan and an advisor to the president. This gave me not just a bird's eye view, an inside view of how laws were drafted, what happened during the Gojra massacre of Christians in Pakistan, a lot of things, and how governments moved and what actually happened on the ground. Along with that, I am an author and I'm a writer and advocate on religious freedom and specifically religious minorities in Pakistan. So I take all those views in. At the time of partition in Pakistan, between Pakistan and India, of course, in 1947, almost 23% of the landmass that became Pakistan, we had 23% non-Muslims. After the bloodshed that took place during partition, we ended up in a situation where that number was greatly lowered, even though the landmass of West Pakistan and East Pakistan was joined. Today, the number of non-Muslims, constitutionally declared non-Muslims, is a meager 3%. And Pakistani Hindus, Christians, Ahmadis, Shias, and all kinds of religious minorities are fleeing the country. Hindus mostly across the border to India if they can. Christian populations moved mainly to Australia and the UK and the US, and so on. So today we're facing a time when the population is already tiny. Most of these populations have lost their leadership. They have lost the powerful among them. They have lost the richest layers of their communities, which means they are as voiceless and as persecuted as could be possible in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. So that is basically where we start off historically, which is what my book is about. But where we come to now is from the ethnic cleansing that happened on both sides during partition till today, the ethnic cleansing of religious minorities, cleansing, destruction of holy sites, attacks by religious extremist groups, some funded and protected by the Pakistani military, who would allow them off season from attacking Kashmir and India and other places, would allow them to then attack Hazara Shias in Balochistan, or a Sindhi temple in Sindh, or the famous Easter bombings of Lahore, which targeted the Christian community. But today we are seeing, just in this last month alone, one of the worst periods, I would say, for Pakistani religious minorities. We have seen the Sri Krishna temple in Islamabad, which was given the go-ahead by first the Nawaz Sharif government, and after that, the Imran Khan government, which was, like a lot of U-turns taken by this government, taken back after there was an assault by Muslims on a boundary wall. The Islamabad area where the Sri Krishna temple was being constructed is an area where there are 3,000 Hindus at least, and there is not a single mandir, not a single temple or crematorium for the Hindus in this area, or the Hindus from further out who needed a place to come to. So this has been, we've also seen an upsurge, as Dr. Evans will probably talk much more about attacks and vandalization of Ahmadi graveyards and gravestones. We have seen a rise in blasphemy cases. We have seen a rise of forced conversions of young Hindu girls in Sindh and young Christian girls in the Punjab. So this, for me, is just a very, very quick overview, but I will end on this note where Khwaja Asif, who's been a member of Pakistan and been a federal minister belonging to Nawaz Sharif's political party many, many times over, has had a case of blasphemy placed against him for merely saying that, all people of Pakistan are basically equal. So they're now going after prominent practicing Sunni Muslims. And there has been another member of parliament this has just happened with. So it is an alarming time. Even those rigid, observant Sunni Muslims who have stood up in the most simple and innocuous way are being attacked with blasphemy. So this is it from me in a nutshell, and thank you.
Thank you, Farnaz. That's a great introduction. Obviously, we have a lot to discuss. Dr. Greenwood, can you give us your opening remarks? What are your thoughts?
Can you unmute me? Is that?
You're unmuted.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, I'm a chair. Just want to introduce myself first a little bit, just to set the scene. I'm chair of World Hindu Congress, an advocacy group raised the human rights situation in Sindh at international platforms. We have a base in UK, US, and Canada. I'm also founder of International Sindhi Women Organization. Just to give you a little bit, that I was born in Sindh, hub of a secular culture in Pakistan. When I was growing up, I used to celebrate Holi, Diwali, and decorate our houses. Religion and faith was all about celebration and sharing in our neighborhood. Since 25 years, things have changed, and I sometimes wonder that it's the same place or not where I was born. Today's context, I will just bring a particular issue. We call it lesser known minorities. We call it Sindhi Hindus. I know Farana's mentioned about Hindus, but the marginalization and violence against Hindus hardly get to the international media or even sometimes national media. In particularly Sindh, we have the majority minority is Hindus, and I'm going to more raise the issue of forced conversion of Sindhi Hindus, and of course some Christian, but in Sindh is a particular issue. We have it has been estimated about 1,000 women and girls from religious minorities are abducted, forcefully converted, and then married off to their abductors every year. Human Rights Commission itself reports that about 20 or more Hindu girls are abducted every month in Sindh, and there is no sort of a proper reporting or any investigation around these missing girls. This ongoing practice is deteriorating the secular fabric of Sindh, dividing people of Sindh. Being mother of 2 girls, it's really a soul destroying to see underage girls which are being victimized on the name of religion and politics. Not only that, I see Pakistan establishment, the army, supported by the judiciary, the police, the parliamentarian, who are currently using this practice of forced conversion as a tactics for their ultimate political gain. A, by dividing Sindhis on the name of religion and eradicating secularism, and B, by targeting women of minorities, especially Hindus in Sindh, will eventually result in actually a mass migration of minorities to other countries, as Farhan has mentioned. And actually, Sindh and Pakistan can become eventually 100% Puritan. The Pakistan has signed and ratified International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. They have signed the Treaty on CEDA. They have also signed Ratified Child Rights Convention, but actually Pakistan has failed to comply with all these treaties. Pakistan, all parties, including our new so-called liberal PM Minister, Mr. Khan, who is the mission to eradicate the Islamophobia around the world, has actually failed to comply with its own international obligation to protect non-Muslim women and girls from exploitation by powerful groups and criminal elements. Even worse is the situation is the psychological impact on families of minorities who actually worry about for their daughters that their girls are not safe in this country and have to leave their ancestors' land to protect them. No party can come in the power without the will of Pakistani army. Indeed, Mr. Khan's backers, which the powerful Pakistan army, have had a leading role in countries' Islamizations, and Khan's political opponents have similarly been complicit. Even People's Party, who themselves call a liberal, has not been able to tackle this forced conversion of issue. In fact, a lot of parliamentarians themselves are involved in this practice. Thank you.
Rubina, thank you very much. Loris, I'd like to bring you into the discussion now. Rubina mentioned the role of the judiciary, and I was wondering, it's made me think a little bit about the role of not just the judiciary, but the legal system, sort of in a larger context. We think of the legal system and the judiciary in any given state as being there to protect and defend the rights, particularly of minority groups. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, give us an update about what role the judiciary, the legal system plays in protecting the rights of religious minorities in Pakistan. What's going on there? Oh, hang on 1 second. You're muted. Let's see if we can fix that.
And also
There we
just
go.
take this opportunity to welcome Jonathan Lord to the conversation. I think he's just
Oh,
welcome, Jonathan.
welcome.
Okay, so Seth, to go to your question, I'll answer your question as briefly as I can, and we'll talk more about this, I think, in more direct questions as we talk later on
Perfect.
today. And I'll add a little bit of context in. Again, to introduce myself or my background, I'm a lawyer. I'm the nerd lawyer in the room, so that's what I'll try and keep very dry in that sense. Yes, so the judiciary has a major role to play, and judiciaries, generally speaking, do have a counter-majoritarian role that they're constitutionally almost delegated to be enacting, right? So whereas you have elected parliament and you have an elected prime minister, judiciary is appointed. And because it's appointed, it's not subject to the whims of the electorate. So if the electorate really wants to go hard and discriminate against minorities, et cetera, the judiciary should be counter-majoritarian, right? Because it's appointed, it's not elected. It doesn't have to go up front. Therefore, what the judiciary needs to be doing is checking some of these violations that are taking place by both state, non-state actors, as both Farnaz and Rubina talked about. And in addition to that, the judiciary has to essentially improve its overall performance, which is rather not so great when it's compared to international standards. I mean, the resolution of any case for a criminal case can be between a year and 10 or 15 years. And so there are absolutely pressures on the legal system. They have not dealt with those pressures, generally speaking. And then when it comes to minorities and being protected by the judiciary, oftentimes we don't see it because the judiciary hasn't focused on improving itself, isn't counter-majoritarian, and in fact is propagating the same kinds of ideas that are part of the majoritarian narrative that's anti-Ahmadi or anti-Hindu, and in fact the judges are propagating that instead of checking that. Their objective, their job, because they're appointed, is to check that, right? So say, no, we have equality in our constitution, therefore we can't allow this kind of behavior or discussion as it relates to these minority groups. So that's what the judiciary should be doing, but because of its overwhelmed nature, because of its lack of ability to perform in many other instances, and because it has itself adopted a majoritarian perspective rather than a counter-majoritarian perspective, we don't see the judiciary stepping in as often as it probably should when we talk about the problems that we have. So to give a general overview of the legal problems, I think as both Rubina and Farnaz pointed out, I mean, the conversion law, the conversion issues of forced conversion is a major issue in Sindh. In other places, the blasphemy law is absolutely an incredibly complicated and a law that's been used to essentially create secondary citizenship for anyone who's not Muslim in Pakistan. That's my view on it, right? So when you have accusations of blasphemy increasing, it's also marginalizing more and more societies, and more communities that are supposed to be brought up in a democratic regime are being suppressed, essentially, right? But I think the thing that people oftentimes forget as well, on top of all of these two sort of developments of forced conversion as well as blasphemy, you have to look at the electoral laws. You have to look at the family laws. You have to look at the hudud ordinances. You have to look at the property laws, and you have to look at the trust property ownership in Pakistan. All of these are also things that are moving by state actors to deprive Christian, Ahmadi, Hindu minorities from their rights, like the right to own a temple, like Farnaz was talking about, like the right to have your inheritance passed to your children without the court stepping in. So all of these are legal issues. All of these are problems both in execution and in the laws themselves. So if you ask for a solution, I would say, we have to revamp a whole system here, because all of these laws create a system by which both state and non-state actors can deprive the absolute basic rights of religious minorities in Pakistan and get away with it, legally speaking. So what we have is almost two parallel tracks running, and they become perpendicular sometimes. So you have state, non-state actors, right? You have a mob, and you have the police, for example, and then the mob attacks the group, the Christians or the Hindus, and the police give them the impunity to do so. They don't imprison them. They allow them to continue these behaviors. So what we have is a crossing when there's sort of parallel discrimination happening both from state and non-state actors, and then how non-state actors can use the state to magnify, to get away with these illegal actions. So that's where I'll leave it. It's a very deep-seated legal and sort of police social problem that we have to discuss. But I'm glad that Abhi is hosting this, and thank you all for facilitating this conversation.
Absolutely, and you brought up a few things that will definitely, I have some follow-up questions, I'm sure other panelists will as well. Before we do that though, I want Dr. Evans, please introduce yourself a little bit and give your any kind of opening remarks that you would like.
Thank you. Yeah, no, so my name's Nicholas Evans, I'm from the London School of Economics. I'm here today. I've just released a book about the Ahmadiyya community. I mainly focus looking at the Ahmadiyya community in India. It's based on long-term fieldwork in the town of Qadian, which is where the community's from. But I have a general interest in the kind of condition of the community in the region. So I'm here as an academic. Together with Seth, I'll be sort of probing and asking questions of the other panelists more than sharing my own sort of views. But that's my role today. So thank you very much.
So much. So we're also very fortunate today to be joined by several members of parliament, as I mentioned at the beginning. I want to go ahead and give Teresa Villers an opportunity to give any opening remarks you would like to give. And then Jonathan Lord, we will also be inviting to give any opening remarks following Ms. Villers. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's an honor for me to take part alongside such distinguished panel members on a discussion of a really important subject. I do so as Conservative MP for Barnet, former cabinet minister, and someone who's campaigned for some years on freedom of religion. I also have a long-standing interest in matters of relevance and concern to the British Indian and Hindu community in my constituency. And I'm a vice chairman of the APPG for British Hindus. And I have, like others who've already spoken, grave concerns about what I really see as a sort of weaponization of Pakistan's blasphemy laws. The 8-year imprisonment of Asia Bibi illustrates the very grave consequences of a blasphemy allegation. According to Christian Solidarity Worldwide, discrimination against Christians is deep-rooted and historic in Pakistan. And the Open Doors charities indicate that churches are heavily monitored and have been targeted for violent attacks. Of course, conversion from Islam to Christianity is very dangerous, and Shia Hazara people are also subjected to regular sectarian violence, including a bomb attack in Quetta last year. As we've heard, the Ahmadiyya community, arguably they're the most widely persecuted religious group in Pakistan, subject to extensive systematic and structural discrimination, as well as to physical attacks. And turning to the Hindu community, obviously the number of Hindus has declined in Pakistan since partition, and many live in poverty or as bonded laborers. An economic disadvantage compounds their vulnerability to sectarian discrimination. There's, as others have said, worrying evidence of girls being kidnapped and forcibly converted and married to their abductors. The Aurat Foundation estimate that as many as 1,000 Hindu and Christian girls are abducted in this way every year. And of course, there is the very serious controversy around a potential new Hindu temple in Islamabad. There hasn't been one built in the city since the creation of Pakistan 70 years ago. Approval for the new temple was given in theory in 2017, but delays and blockages means it's not making progress. And we've seen threats and fatwas issued against the project. And I'm concerned, lastly, I'd say that I'm worried about the education system in Pakistan. Some of the textbooks used seem to promote division and intolerance in relation to minority faiths. And as we gather together with the COVID outbreak still very real in many countries around the world, I think we should also reflect on the reports from people like the National Commission for Justice and Peace in Pakistan that Hindus, Christians, and other religious minorities are in some cases being denied help during the COVID emergency. So it's crucial, I think, that the international community makes representations to the government of Pakistan to address these questions and the others that have been raised by the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You brought up several important points, and I think that everyone will be. I'm interested to hear what all of the panelists have to say about several of these. Before we get to the wider discussion, though, I'd like to welcome Member of Parliament Jonathan Ward and invite you to give any opening statement, any opening remarks, thoughts that you would like to share with the panelists and those that are viewing this discussion online. You may be experiencing some technical difficulties there. I tell you what, let's go ahead and while we get that sorted, we will continue with the discussion. I'd like to start, I have a question for Farnaz, but obviously anyone should feel free to jump in here. You mentioned at the very beginning the controversy over the construction, the proposed construction of a Hindu temple in Islamabad. Mm-hmm. One thing that I have been very interested in is the difference in the popular response to this as opposed to the opening last year of the Kartarpur corridor, which allowed Sikh pilgrims to visit into Pakistan religious pilgrimages from India. That seemed to really not get any popular pushback or any popular opposition. There have been, I know, some scholars have suggested that the Kartarpur corridor was as much a political or public relations push by the state of Pakistan as it was any attempt at providing a new direction for religious freedom in the country. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, what are your thoughts about why there's been such a visceral, such a strong difference in response to this Hindu temple as opposed to Kartarpur?
I think there are two parts. One, the Pakistani military was extremely closely involved in the Kartarpur and the Sikh temple opening and trying to get pilgrims from India over. It was whatever the reasonings behind it, but I do believe it was the military establishment very clearly, which is why it was done so smoothly and so easily. In these cases, which are not of PR importance, you see Prime Minister Imran Khan over and over again doing these U-turns. For example, we have to keep in mind that Mr. Khan, when he campaigned, talked about the fact that he would uphold the blasphemy law at all costs. So he had let us know where he was coming from. He is someone of a very conservative and I would use the word Islamist bent personally. And in this situation, this was not a question of India and Pakistan relations. This was not a question where the military was involved. So the poor Hindu community of Islamabad really had no protection. So even though Imran Khan's own minister, Lal Malhi, PTI Minorities Member of Parliament, was the one who had championed it. At the moment Imran Khan and his cabinet saw that the public didn't like it, so
Farnaz, I think you're breaking up a little bit.
Frankly, the Imran Khan government is not interested.
Got it. Yeah. So we've heard over and over again about the state, whether it's the elected.
So I'm sorry. I think, did we get cut off for a second? So I just want to finish. There's also another very, very important thing, which I know the members of parliament here will have followed, which was the formation of the National Commission on Minorities. Now, according to the former Justice Gilani of the Supreme Court, the commission was supposed to be set up through a parliamentary committee, and it was supposed to have no interference from the judiciary or the military or anyone else. So what Imran Khan did again, what his government did once again, was to please the Americans and organizations like the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is a congressionally founded watchdog. All they did at this point was they said, oh, we formed the commission, but they formed the commission with appointed members and not the members that these communities wanted for themselves. So it's false representation. It's not what the Hindu community wanted or the Christians, etc. So it's become a figurehead commission. So I'm just giving you an example of that. Imran Khan, over and over again, his government does a lot of fig leaf gestures, except where it's not important to them, such as this mandir in Islamabad.
You bring up the Commission on Minorities, and I'm glad you did, because there was something in the formation of this commission that I thought was really extraordinary, which was, as I understand it, and I'm interested in all of the panelists' thoughts on this, but as I understand it, there was quite a controversy over whether or not a member of the Ahmadiyya community would be allowed to participate, and ultimately, I believe there was a decision that even though Ahmadiyya is obviously a religious minority community, arguably one of the worst persecuted in the country, had no representation. Waris, could you, what was going on there?
Yeah, this actually goes back to exactly what Farnaz was talking about. This administration is all about check the box for international, and then say something completely different, do something completely different to appease your domestic supporter. They have consistently shown inconsistency. The most consistent thing about this administration is its inconsistency, where it says something to the international community and then turns around, and then as soon as there's pushback from within the party or within the more established sort of Islamist ranks in the party, they completely change. So it's one step forward and two steps back. So I think the one thing about the Ahmadi community, and this goes to electoral rolls as well, and I'm sure I would love to hear what Nick has to say about this, because his research has been on this specifically. But essentially, it's forcing the Ahmadis to do something they don't want to do, which is that in order to be on this commission, essentially the requirement was you say that you're not a Muslim. For Ahmadis, they can't do that. It's a violation of their principles of faith, right? To say that they're not Muslim. So they set up these kind of honeypots, or these kind of fake sort of legal or political sort of manifestations, or not manifestations, but solutions. And then when the Ahmadis say, well, we can't declare ourselves as not members of the faith that we belong to, then the Pakistani government turns around and says, oh, well, see, you don't want to be part of the commission. That's not our fault. We created it to make it for you. You created it because you wanted to force them to say something that they cannot say. That's why you created it. And another reason why you created it is because USCIRF, which is the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which Farnaz had mentioned before, I was the South Asia policy analyst for a year and a half there. So I know exactly what was happening in the negotiations for this. The U.S. government was upset and had let the Pakistani government know through various avenues about the treatment of minorities, and asked for the Imran Khan government essentially to bring forward this minorities commission, with the thought that, okay, if they create the commission, then there's going to be positive developments and there's going to be protection, right? And what winds up happening is they go back and they create this commission in a way to just check the box so that the U.S. government doesn't get upset. Or continues to bring this issue up, and then they continue to do what they've been doing before, which is marginalizing and disenfranchising minorities. That's what the continuous process has been, and that's what it continues to be regardless of the creation of this commission. The commission was created to check international development box.
Rubina,
that's my view.
Rubina, I think you're muted right now, if you could. There you go. Oh, one more time.
Okay.
There we go.
Just would like to just add a couple of things. I mentioned as well that Pakistan is signatory of all these international treaties of human rights. Yeah. We also in Pakistan we have children's right against marriage level and the age limit and so on. I think what we do need help actually, which I mean members here sitting, is that we might have a legislation, we might have a law, but there's no implementation. I think it's a fundamental. Okay, yes, the step one is to have these legislations and laws. I do agree with it, but when we have a minimum laws or legislation, we are nobody's implementing. They just easily bypasses. I think this is where is a focus we need and help from international community to put the pressure on Pakistan to comply with the legislations or the treaties which they have signed, or even the in-house laws which they have got for child marriages and so, especially forced marriage issue. It touches upon many other legislative areas. So not only children's right, women's right, you name it. But we all have these fantastic laws, but there's no implementation. I think this is where we need to focus.
Dr. Grimwood, could you, one thing I was curious about, Sindh in particular, is unique in some ways in that it does have, is home to the country's largest population of Hindu citizens. And I was wondering what, with regards to either lawmaking or implementation, execution of the laws, has that larger population in Sindh helped to ensure that Hindus, any religious minority group in Sindh, is better protected? Are they in a better situation in Sindh than in other parts of the country? Could you give us a little bit of background on that?
I think there's two aspects of it. Yes, it's traditionally it's been a very secular nation and the people of Sindh. You can see that Sindh was the first. We proposed the bill against forced conversion, but of course that bill was rejected because of the pressure of Islamic Commission. And still the activists and people are progressing with it. But also one thing is a different angle which need to say, when Pakistan realized that the Sindh is a more secular, they put more focus on radicalization. We used to have 1,500 madrasas maybe about 30 years ago. Today we have more than 24,000 madrasas in Sindh, and they are strategically located where we have a Hindu population. It's a constant, organized, systematic brainwashing is going on of the people. And despite of that, actually people are very resilient and still maintaining the secular behavior. Yes, comparatively, they are more progressive in the rest of Pakistan, but it's still, you could see there are 3 to 4 times armies investing in madrasa and in Sindh. And it has impact. It has resulted, you can see the forced conversion increase in Sindh. And we are very sad about the situation. But I think this is where I think we need to look at the whole education system and how the investment is going on, the curriculum, the syllabus, and the brainwash of the young people in Sindh province.
Absolutely.
Could I just jump in right on the back?
Absolutely, please.
Christina's saying, right? I believe Ms. Villiers brought up the Aurat Foundation numbers of 1,000 forced conversions of young women. The 2018 figures from the All Pakistan Hindu Panchayat said that there were 1,000 forced conversions in that year of 2018, out of which 300 were Hindu and 700 were Christian, but this is according to what their figures were. I don't have a second source on breakdown. And also from the parliamentary point of view, they have been the only province that has tried to pass bills on forced conversion has been Sindh province, which Rubina is talking about, and where the majority of Pakistan's, I would say, pluralistic culture, whether it was Sufi culture, whether it was, the languages, mysticism, the plurality of Sindh, basically, in every way. So in 2016, a bill against forced conversion was proposed and passed by the Sindh legislature, but the government of Sindh refused to sign it under pressure. And then in 2019, just in last year, the bill of forced conversion was brought up again with some changes. And this time it was not passed by the assembly at all. So you can see what Dr. Rubina has been talking about, but how it's becoming faster and faster and faster. The pressure from the Islamists, the pressure of these new madrasas, these militant armed madrasas in Sindh that have been allowed to be built by politicians, and a lot of members of parliament are involved in the forced conversion issues because they feel, you know, it's a blessing to convert a non-Muslim to Islam. So we are seeing an acceleration, and I really hope that the members of parliament here from the United Kingdom, and we speak a lot to members of the United States Senate and Congress, that the only time Pakistan does anything is under pressure. GST plus, etc., etc. These are the mechanisms which have to be tied. Aid has to be tied to a human rights lever. I mean, these things have to be put into your bills, because on our own, and people in Pakistan, these faith-based communities are trying very, very hard, but they're becoming more and more muted because the threats are becoming more and more dire.
Can I want to expand the conversation a little bit. We've talked a lot about the persecution of Hindus, of Ahmadis, of Christians, but there's one thing that I think is particularly interesting. Farnaz, your book, Purifying the Land of the Pure, talks a lot about not just the persecution of non-Muslim religious minorities, but also minority sects within Islam itself. You know, I'm thinking in particular of the attacks that have been carried out in recent years against Shia, which Teresa brought up earlier, but also Sufi. You know, one of the things that I have been interested to learn is that according to data compiled by the Center for Islamic Research Collaboration and Learning in Rawalpindi, there have been 209 people killed and 560 injured in over 30 terrorist attacks targeting Sufi shrines in recent years. So it seems, you know, if it's not just forced conversion to Islam, if it's not enough to be Muslim, you know, where are the lines? What are the expectations?
Basically, the way that I had seen it is that when this project happened after the formation of Pakistan, of turning Pakistan into an Islamic state and purifying the land of the pure, what starts with the purification project is, first, obviously, you start off by saying, you know, you add to the Constitution, you add this amendment basically saying that, yeah, all citizens are equal, but, right? But Islam is the religion of the realm, etc. So it started off with really a discrimination, constitutional discrimination against Christians and Hindus and Jains and Sikhs. Then you come to the 80s and you come to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and you come to Zia ul Haq, and you come about the blasphemy laws, which have been targeted with, and the anti-Ahmadi laws, which targeted basically everyone. And then once you start this sordid purification process, then you start reaching, that's when you get to the Ahmadis. Oh, the Ahmadis are not Muslim enough. Let's cut them out, right? Then I would say the only rise in the amount of minorities in Pakistan in the numbers was the addition of the Ahmadis, who were Muslim and made non-Muslim, right? And then the Shia, all these militias that were started by Zia-ul-Haq to fight in Afghanistan against the Soviets, those were the same militias that carried out Zia's very anti-Shia campaign, right? Zia-ul-Haq's anti-Shia campaign. So next then, so you start on the Shias from the 1980s, and then come the Sufis. And I go back to what Dr. Greenwood said, Sindh in particular, the land of southern Punjab and Sindh have been the land of Sufi culture, where, like in Ajmer Sharif in India, Hindus, Christians, Muslims, no matter what kind of Muslims there were. So basically, the Pakistani population has been brainwashed by textbooks, they've been brainwashed by their clerics, they have been brainwashed by the government and these laws, which they take to be God's laws, like the blasphemy law. And so today, these attacks, some are state-based to undermine a government, like they did against the PPP government in the 2000s. And some are now a hugely radicalized population. So, you know, basically anyone today who is not a hardcore, either a Wahhabi or Deobandi Muslim male, all bets are off. And even if they show sympathy for any minority of any kind, and Sufis have now become part of that minority group, even though they're practicing Muslims. So it's become a very complicated scenario.
You mentioned something again. Oh, Nick, go ahead.
You know, I was just going to say, I mean, something which is perhaps quite important to think about is you know, all of these attempts to define certain kind of quite mainstream forms of Islam as minority, as deviant practices. I mean, all of them have been about sort of defining a safe majoritarian identity for what a Pakistani citizen can be. You know, it's about kind of defining what the identity of the state is and shoring that up from outside threats by kind of saying these particular parts of Islam within us need to be expunged. And that's a process that's been going on for decades. Seth, do you want to come in? I believe Teresa also has a point to make on this.
Yes, it sort of follows on logically from what you were just saying, Nick. It seems to me that impunity is a big problem here, that it's the root of much of what we're talking about, that these criminal activities, whether it's abduction or forced conversions, those responsible are not being brought to justice. So, I mean, it seems to me as that much of the problem is part of Pakistan's broader issue with the strength of its institutions, its ability to see the rule of law respected, the comparative weakness of its sort of judicial and security institutions. And that obviously has negative consequences for many within the community, and they sadly turn out to be even more serious for those groups who are also face the disadvantage of being religious minorities as well. So I'd be interested to hear from the rest of the panel about, you know, whether they agree that it's this broader problem with holding people to account within the Pakistan legal system, which is a serious driver of the problem for religious minorities.
Could I comment on that?
Absolutely, and I want to before you do, I just want to inject something in here, because it was reported by the Associated Press earlier this week that the United Nations has freed up expense money for several UN globally designated terrorists, including Lashkar-e-Taiba founder Hafiz Saeed. And this was apparently done at the request of the Pakistani state. So, Dr. Greenwood, you know, as we're talking about impunity in particular, and the messages that extremists and violent actors are getting from the state with regards to consequences and rule of law, How does that in particular impact that?
Well, I was going to talk when Teresa said that about impunity. Yes, it is to some extent the lack of rule of law and bring to justice the girls or the against criminal activity. I think the fundamental thing is that these activities are just not done by people. It is an institution. It's the state. It's the establishment wants to happen. So how can, when the state wants to do that, will be able to implement the law? I think it's a fundamental issue. This is where we are begging to United Kingdom or other international countries to work with Pakistan, that they have to change this intention. If they want to break something, they want to stop something, they can do it. But the problem is that they don't want to do it because they want to make a Puritan Pakistan. They want to make 100% Wahhabi, pure Muslim. Now, this is again, I mean, picking up to Farhana's the discussion about it. Yes, we need a one version of Islam, which is Wahhabi version. It has relationship with the politics, the formation of OIC. If you go back a little bit in the history, it was done by Saudi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And the Saudi dominance, the Saud's dominance on the Islamic world is one of the key sort of element which we miss or we forget about it, is that we need to implement Wahhabi Islam around the world because it supports the not progressive behavior, no secular behavior, and it's easy to dominate on the people because when people are not progressive, not freedom, it's easy to dominate. So this is the angle we should be focusing on it. Okay.
Seth, could I jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so actually from the perspective of having worked in US Congress, I think one of the things that, so my law professor used to say, what are the problems we can fix? What are the problems we can't fix, right? And I think one of the problems we might not be able to necessarily fix from outside, right, necessarily, is fixing this impunity issue, is fixing the enforcement issue. But from the outside, what we can control is how we review and examine the human rights or religious freedom records of countries. Now, the reason why I think Imran Khan passed that minorities rights sort of commission and created it, right, was because it feeds into being able to game the system and gaming the system at the international level, right? So I've created this commission, therefore I've checked the box, and there's not going to be any follow-up done by our international partners. I've already created the law because for us, at least in Congress, right? I'm not sure how it is in Parliament for UK, but in a lot of Western countries, once we get a report that the law has been changed, then we change our reporting and we say, okay, well, things have gotten better. Instead of saying, why don't we make it a conditions-based issue, right? So instead of just passing the law, show us 1 year of demonstrated sort of practice and experience of not allowing impunity, not allowing these crimes to happen, actually make it a conditions-based thing rather than just the creation of legislation. I think the Western parties have really focused on influencing Pakistan or pushing them towards creating legislation. I think the point now has to be, how do we continue putting the pressure on them once they've passed the law to actually execute and enforce the law? Because we know Ireland had a blasphemy law, right? There's lots of countries, weird countries that you would think they have a blasphemy law. And the reason why you think it's weird is because they don't enforce it. They don't ever actually do cases about that, right? The reason why we know about it in Pakistan and so highlighted is because it's so enforced, it's so done practically. So I think one of the things that international aid, trade, and partnerships should be looking at is not just in terms of our rubrics to say that passing a law is enough and we're good. I think we have to have continued demonstration of lack of impunity, continued demonstration of a year or 2 years of actually meeting conditions, not just meeting laws. Because it's one thing to create a law, and it's another thing to create a change in society based on that law. And that requires a lot of follow-up work. And what we're not so good at in the US and I think the EU and other partners is that follow through. Okay, you passed the law, now tell us what you're doing in terms of executing it. That's where we aren't as good. I think where we could be better. And I think we can get better at that, and hopefully we will. That's one of the things that we should be focusing on, how to influence our partners in a continued way so that they can't just check the box and walk away.
And that's part of the reason that we're doing this, what I hope is the first of many discussions where we're not only inviting experts, but lawmakers and decision makers in government so that they can hear. And I just wanted to take this moment to note, we did receive a note from Member of Parliament, Jonathan Lord. I'm sure he was kind of popping in and out. He was having some technical issues, but he sent a note saying that he's really sorry, but he's having some technical issues. However, he's going to be sure to continue following the discussions online, and that he has already gleaned many important insights. So I think having Mr. Lord, having Ms. Villers, and others take part in these discussions is really key. I want to take a break for a few minutes. We have a short video. I think it's only maybe a minute long, but we'll let the panelists get a drink of water, take a breath, and then watch this video, and we'll come back and finish up our discussion.
Hundreds of Pakistani Christians have taken to the streets to demand better protection after an arson attack razed a Christian district in Lahore to the ground, destroying several hundred homes. Shop windows were stoned in Karachi and police fired into the air to disperse crowds, while in Lahore buses were attacked and a main road was blocked and passing traffic came under a hail of projectiles. There were also several peaceful protests throughout the province of Punjab. Police arrested 150 suspects following the arson attack, which was sparked by accusations of blasphemy against a member of the Christian community following an argument with a Muslim man. Police say the suspected arsonists will be tried in an anti-terrorist court. It was extremely cruel, inhumane. We've been made homeless for nothing. We did nothing wrong, committed no blasphemy. Punjab's law minister condemned the arsonists and promised to bring them to the gallows, but also condemned the protests, warning Christians they should not take the law into their own hands.
So that was just a brief news footage that goes over some of the topics that we have been discussing, and I think that it does a good job of showcasing how very real these issues, not only of blasphemy allegations, not only of mob violence and impunity, the impact that they have on real people's lives. I want to get into something that I've heard, I believe maybe everybody at this point has brought up, although I'll acknowledge that Ms. Villers brought this up first, as I recall. We heard a little bit about the expansion of madrasas, but I'm interested in hearing a little bit about, for those who are not enrolled in madrasas, the role of textbooks and curriculum in the government or secular schools, and what what impact is that having? What does the curriculum look like, and is that moving the country towards a more secular ideology?
Well, perhaps if I come in briefly on that, I'm sure others will have much greater expertise than I in it. But I mean, actually, all over the world, we're having a debate about our kind of history and schools curriculum, and including in the United Kingdom, in terms of, because it is so crucial how we educate future generations. It is so crucial to how every nation views itself in terms of its identity. So it seems to me that this is fruitfully an area in which the international community should be able to engage, I hope, with the authorities in Pakistan, not least because there are millions and millions and millions of UK taxpayers' money is going to support the education system in Pakistan. So in those circumstances, it's not unreasonable for the UK government to be really strongly pushing for curriculum materials to be balanced and non-partisan, and to promote a sort of inclusive approach to individuals and communities from minority faiths.
Absolutely. I suppose, Teresa, I think it's a very welcome advice, actually, because if we say this, that the curriculum of Pakistani schools were changed in 80s when General Zia was ruling Pakistan, and that time, the whole curriculum, the whole subjects, and everything was censored. The all secular and liberal literature was completely gone, and the absolutely 7 to 8 grade or 9th grade, the whole Islamiyat was completely revamped. The Pakistan studies, there's no history before 1971, so there's no name of Bangladesh or any. So from politics to the religion to the jihadism, it's all completely revamped the whole curriculum of the schools. And the PEW has done a lot of research, and there's a lot of PhD has been done on this matter, that how the subjects, the schools, especially the age of 12, 13, 14 years old, the subjects they are studying, how it's radicalized and how the jihad has been defined in these young minds, that actually marrying a Hindu woman and Islamic is actually part of the jihad. So these are the situations you read in the schools and that. And I would welcome Teresa and the UK government to work, with the educational donation to have an absolutely research done and propose the update of this Islamiyat and the all Pakistan studies and all these subjects in schools. So thank you.
I want to ask Ms. Villas something about this. I remember that, the British High Commission in Islamabad, partnering, and at the bequest of DFID, education has been the UK's #1 aid priority in Pakistan, and for many years. And yet that has not been linked to, the work of people who I greatly admire, like Lord Alton, Baroness Berridge, people in the UK Parliament who has such pioneers of religious freedom, and particularly who care about the minorities of Pakistan on really critical occasions. And so I guess this is an internal thing for you, all of you, to look at about really, there's a way to manage a relationship with another country, but yet keep what matters to you as the UK, or in terms of the US or Western Europe, on the front burner. The only reason Asia Bibi, Asia Noreen got out was because of parliaments like yours. And but today another young Christian woman is in the same cell as Asia Bibi. So Pakistan can no longer get away with doing that one big case, or creating the National Commission on Minorities, of freeing Asia Bibi, etc., and yet not revising those textbooks. So I think the carrot and stick, a little, at least equivalent amount of stick with the carrot would be something that we as activists or scholars would be really grateful for, to support the communities on the ground.
Well, certainly that is one of the main conclusions I'll take away from this discussion, that I as a parliamentarian need to raise these questions with ministers more robustly. I think there are very serious problems in terms of protection of minorities in Pakistan, but there are also opportunities for the UK government and the rest of the international community to do more to try and steer Pakistan in the right direction. And you're right, actually, some of the few positive points have actually been linked to international attention on particular cases. So I think it is important that Parliament gets a chance to debate this issue further. I certainly hope it will be. We're slightly constrained at the moment because the COVID emergency means that our secondary debating chamber is not open. But once that reopens after the summer break, I hope we should very soon be able to have the opportunity to look specifically at the situation, the issues that we've been discussing in a debate in the House of Commons. I think that would be the right thing to do, and I'll certainly be pressing for that to happen.
And just to jump in, Seth, if that's cool.
Absolutely.
I think the syllabus issue is one of the ones where I was studying it from the international sort of development perspective from the US. So with looking at State Department action, looking at US aid, which is the US funding arm essentially of the government for international aid. Tens of millions of dollars have been spent by the US government on studying to change and reform the syllabuses of Pakistan. Some of the changes went through, and then a year later or 2 years later, they were changed right back. As soon as the US looked away, as soon as everyone had walked away because they said, this is done now, we've completed our collaboration with the Pakistani government, the syllabuses are fixed now. Guess what? A year later, they're changed back to the original format. So this whack-a-mole approach that the Pakistani government sort of has taken and is gaming the system. I really believe the Pakistani government is gaming the system. They figured out that if we can do like exactly what Farhanaz was saying, if we can do that one big case, we can create a commission, if we can let Asia Bibi out, then we don't have to deal with the institutional problems in our society and in our culture. That's basically what they do. And the syllabus is absolutely, Seth, I think one of the most important things to have here, right? If you have a rising narrative of anti-Christian, anti-Hindu from kids, it's happening because the syllabus teaches them in some way, shape, or form, right? And we have reforms happening. We have, and I'm telling you, I know of tens of millions of dollars the U.S. government has spent on studying the reforms of syllabus in Pakistan and asking them to change it. And again, they have changed it for a year or 2 years. And as soon as the local ministries see that the U.S. embassy isn't looking anymore, they change them right back. So again, it's just playing two different cricket matches. It's playing towards the international community, and then it's playing domestically. And they're two different leagues. They're not even the same game, really. So just keep that in mind. I think as we look at engagement from lots of governments, awesome. It's really great that the UK and US have pressed on Pakistan, and we wouldn't have the even nominal changes without that. But I think the follow through is where we need to really amp up our focus and not let them think that we've walked away or that we're not interested in this issue anymore because you've done one thing. It's a continued sort of development of this capability, capacity. It's going to be really institutional change, and institutional change doesn't happen through one or two things. It doesn't happen through one syllabus change. It has to happen in a more deep way. But if you want the international community to be involved in that, I think we have to take a more dynamic and just like MP Villers was saying, a more robust approach. That's really the best way to do.
Is the international community getting involved in the current temple issue?
It seems as if some of them are getting involved. I don't know if it was early enough at the outset that the international community got involved where it could impact the decision making. I think it's been a little late. Again, because like what Farhanaz and Rubina were both saying, that sort of there was not as much focused international media or otherwise on this as it was developed. So I think that it's developing now, but again, it's a little late. So it makes things a little bit more difficult to move things in the right progressive direction, I think, because the international community oftentimes is late to the, and it's the decisions and policies have already been made by the government. Now they can change them, and we can try and force them to change them and put pressure on them to continue that. And I think that's really what is required. The EU, the US has to press upon this Imran Khan government to say, like, this temple is symbolic of a lot of other things. Do this correctly and do the rest correctly, and we'll continue our aid, we'll continue our trade, we'll continue our security relations. If not, we can walk away. That's the thing that Pakistani government doesn't believe that's going to happen in the international community, that they'll actually walk away. But, you can only beat a dog so many times before it barks back. So I think the international community definitely has taken a lot in terms of interest in Pakistan and following through. And I think the Pakistani government has sort of said, well, you're not going to leave us. So we'll go back to our old bad habits as soon as you start looking away. And I think that's what's going to happen with the Mandir as well.
Right. So,
come in
yes.
with that. Unfortunately, I think it's clear that there are difficulties with quotes walking away because the security relationship with Pakistan is so important in efforts to combat terrorism. So, for example, our aid to support institutions and security matters in Pakistan, I can't see that it's difficult to see that in any circumstances being withdrawn because of the sort of self-interest there is in providing that aid. And I think this sort of reveals the sort of illustrative of some of the tensions here. And one has to ask how governments are grappling with that dilemma, on the one hand, wanting a a very close relationship with the government of Pakistan in order to support it and engage with it in combating terrorism, but not in so doing wanting to look as if they're tolerating oppression of minorities and attacks on religious minorities. I think there is genuinely something of a tension there, a moral dilemma for Western governments to grapple with.
I would say it's like a two-way abusive relationship in some ways. So like figuring it out and parsing it apart, you're right. It's very hard to do because every country has an interest there, including the US, by the way, a huge interest for security there and a lot of aid going there. So I totally agree. I just think that there needs to be a change in some kind of viewpoint, not maybe walking away, maybe that was the wrong word to use, but maybe something else. That says we're serious and we can't let this keep happening because you keep playing the same game. It's not helping you. It's not helping us. Everyone loses, really. So let's fix it in a more strategic, big picture way rather than a transactional way. If that makes sense. I totally agree. And you're totally right. There are security interests and there are other interests like trade that we can't just throw out the window, but we have to change the paradigm of this relationship in some way because it feels like it's being gamed. And then
Dr. Greenwood, I think you had a...
Yeah, I just wanted to say I absolutely understand where Teresa was talking about, that there's a whole dilemma of maintaining the interest of security, global security issues, and obviously maintaining the human rights issue. But I think we need to really go into a little bit more deep down on us that this global security and the geographical security threats are where they are coming from, how they were made, who originated, who is actually sponsoring it, who's supporting it till today. I'm, as a British citizen, I'm absolutely concerned about my security and my people in UK, as a British citizens. But I think as a British citizen, actually, Teresa, I'm asking, who is sponsoring this terrorism? What is happening of these borders and these regions so volatile? Again, brings you back to, I'm afraid, to the Pakistani military, which is still day to day are supporting and sponsoring this terrorism, allegedly. Of course, I have no proof, but allegedly. So I think we need to look at it that yes, it is very difficult to maintain human rights and the global security, but at the same time, that the same state is involved in the global security issues as well. Thank you.
So Ms. Villers has mentioned that she plans to take these issues, that she would like to see more debates. I think we all would. Mr. Long as well said that he's already gleaned a lot of valuable insights. He's going to continue following these. As we wrap up this conversation, just for today, I want to kind of go around and get, if each of the panelists could just take 2 or 3 minutes and tell us a little bit, especially for any members of Parliament, members of Congress, or decision makers that are paying attention. What's the way forward? We've heard a lot today. We've talked a lot about the challenges, and we have heard a few comments about some ideas about how to improve things and the levers, the options that the international community in particular has. So let's see if we could sum some of that up, because I like to always end on a positive note. I always like to end on a note of here's what we can do. Farnaz, would you lead us off?
What I have to say on a positive note is that I would greatly appreciate, as would the Hindu community and all minorities in Pakistan, if Mr. Imran Khan would grow a spine, put his personal beliefs behind him as the elected leader of the country, make sure the Sri Krishna Mandir and crematorium goes forward and is given protection. And I would like to see the jails emptied of these young people and people from minority groups on alleged blasphemy cases. And so I basically right now, I think there has to be a list of talking points of things which need to be addressed right now, because this month we've seen an acceleration, and it needs to be, whether we put it together in the form of a letter to the British High Commission, the Pakistani embassy here, or to the Prime Minister in Islamabad, and we whoever on this panel would be happy to sign it, and let's get a petition going that these are actionable items. And let's get the leaders of those communities to sign off on it too. And if we can get to publish it in newspapers, if people are willing to give us free space or contribute, we really need to show that this is not. Today on this panel, we have a member of parliament, we have an academic, we have a legal scholar, we have a scholar of Sindh and of Sindhi culture and on women's issues, etc. This is a very strong. So why don't we start with us leading this off and just talking about what has happened in the last 30 days and then break it down. That would be, I always want to take an action forward. So
absolutely, and I love the idea of starting with us, right? Because change, that's the old saying: change begins with us. Dr. Greenwood, what are your thoughts? What's the way forward?
I think I will start with a specific and then a little bit general. So first of all, I feel and humbly request the Member of Parliament that the forced conversion of the young underage girl is not a Pakistani issue. It's an international issue. It's a children's right. Mm-hmm. And I would like to humbly request Teresa and the other members to have a sort of open discussion about this issue, because it's beyond every human rights issue. It is a girl-child issue. So I would like to have a focus and parliamentary debate on it. We need to have some sort of questions from the Pakistan High Commission and Pakistani ministries as well about it, how we are protecting, how these children's rights are not being implemented. So specifically on the forced conversion, I would request a humble focus on it, and especially for the Hindu girl underage. The second, I think, in generally about the minorities issues and things, I think we do have to have a more parliamentary debate and the local issues within the local constituencies. For the trades and the DFID and any aid, I think we have to we do have a condition just to recognize the treaties and legislation, as I've said, but we need to ask them, demonstrate for last 2 to 5 years performance of human rights on the various elements. We identify what are the work streams or areas to focus, and maybe the forced conversion comes on the one of the work stream and that identification to see that how we have managed to control the forced conversion of underage girls in last 2 to 5 years. So building these conditions in trades and aid would also be very useful. Well, I also request Teresa to look at the working with Foreign Office, basically to look at the education and any review of curriculum of the school, especially the public schools. The private schools, you might, for the richer schools are a little bit more liberal and secular. It's the where majority, 80% the public school curriculum needs an update, it needs a review, it needs international intervention. And please, when the commissions and the missions are going to Pakistan, please do not stay in Islamabad. Please go into other regions, do the interior part of the countries where the actually truth is, where the 80% population lives. Thank you.
Fantastic. Waris, I think Waris has popped out for a minute. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, a kind of general point is that I think, it can seem a bit paternalistic for us to have this discussion based as we are in the US and the UK. But an important point to make is that, there are many people within Pakistan who are horrified by the blasphemy laws, people who, have Ahmadi friends who would like to be able to speak up in public, to say things about it, who are actually scared to do so. People have been violently attacked for speaking ill of the blasphemy laws before. There is a kind of culture of fear which prevents people from speaking while they are within the country. Just to kind of say, it is important to continue having these discussions in international spaces and to continue kind of creating space for Pakistanis themselves to have those, opinions, because of that climate of fear that can exist within certain parts of Pakistani society.
Absolutely, very, very, very well said. Waris, I think that you are here.
Yeah, can you hear me, Jeff?
In voice? Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. Sorry.
So we're talking about.
I'm a ghost now, so go ahead. Yeah.
We were talking about just sort of wrapping up with some thoughts, brief thoughts about a way forward.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Evans brings up a really valid point. I don't think anything that anyone has said here is necessarily new. There are Pakistani people who have said all the things that we're talking about, and in their living rooms and drawing rooms, and in their family gatherings, they're talking about these things like that. But again, just like we've discussed, it's those voices that are being suppressed, oppressed, persecuted, and prosecuted. And so our job should, of course, be to facilitate those voices. There is no community that's voiceless. They just don't have a mic in front of them. Our objective is to put that mic in front of them and make sure that they can express their voices, right? So I agree with absolutely what Dr. Evans was saying. I think in addition, I'll go with 2 points, and I'll start like Rubina did with just one specific case. I think MP Villiers, if you could, or your party could look into the case of Junaid Hafiz. Now, Junaid Hafiz is a young professor. He spent time in the US doing his master's degree. He went back to Pakistan to engage as a professor at a lower income university. And there he was trying to expand people's sort of viewpoints, challenge the patriarchy, challenge this blasphemy law, et cetera, et cetera. He was accused of blasphemy, and for the last 5 years, he has been in jail in solitary confinement alone in a cell. He was convicted last year with a death sentence for blasphemy. And, I'm working on advocating for his case. So, if you could look into that, it's Junaid Hafiz, and he's a former professor and former Fulbright scholar, and a very, very worthy case to look into as far as we look into blasphemy cases being violative of basic human rights laws, right? So that's the one thing. The other thing I think is going back to, not to keep harping on my point, but of course to say that, we have to know what game the Pakistani government is sort of playing, and we have to play that same game, right? We have to make sure that we can meet them on the same field and understand the rules of the game. So if it is an approach that the state has learned that over time, if we can pass nominal laws, if we can do basic things without actually changing the underlying issues for our society and our governance and our overall sort of structure, then that's something we should know in the international community, that's how they're perceiving it, right? So if we look at the National Minorities Commission, if we look at even forced conversion laws, all of these have to be looked at not just at the passage state of the law, it has to be the enforcement state as well. Continued enforcement, stopping the impunity for individuals who are engaged in continued behavior. All of this requires so much more work, so much more research, so much more resources for international partners. I definitely know that for a fact, right? To keep this continued pressure and to watch these things and not just allow them to check the box is a lot of work and a lot of resources. But I do think that if you want to change the actual nature of this relationship, to not let it be a whack-a-mole, check the box kind of thing, to let there actually be positive developments brought, I think it's possible to do. So that's my positive note. We can do it. It's just a question of changing how we do it and how continuous our efforts and our attention is. The international attention can be pretty short. Our attention spans are pretty short in a lot of ways because the world is on fire most of the time, right? That being said, continuing to keep the pressure and continuing to watch and monitor the enforcement, the actual implementation of laws, that's where we can get better. And I think if we get better at that, that's when the game is going to change completely, because we'll be playing the same game as the government potentially.
Right. Thank you, Wars.
I'm sorry, Seth, but I have to jump in here to respond to Dr. Evans.
Well, can we?
One quick point.
Okay.
It is not
1 minute.
paternalistic. It is not paternalistic to be sitting here. As Dr. Greenwood well knows, the reason we are speaking is because every day people are being disappeared in Pakistan. There's not just the case that Waris just talked about. 4 or 5 professors we know, liberal professors at universities, and by liberal I don't mean politically liberal, but thought liberal, have been fired from their jobs. A publisher of the most major English language newspaper in Pakistan is languishing in jail. Our Baloch brothers, our Pashtun brothers, our Sindhi brothers are being picked up and disappeared. The reason Dr. Greenwood and I are advocating it every forum is because we are their voices. We are certainly not presuming not to speak for those on the ground. We are speaking for those who cannot speak. And I'm sorry I'm a bit impassioned about this, but
No.
this is something we do every day. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sorry about
No. That's an excellent point. I want to give
I was speaking more about us non-Pakistanis being those who are born in the country. Yeah.
So I do want to provide an opportunity to our guest of honor, Member of Parliament Teresa Villers, to give some closing remarks. You've taken a lot today. We've heard a lot of things. I, in particular, have been was particularly impressed with the insights that you brought to the discussion. That was very encouraging to me. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. What's next, and what do you see as a way forward?
Well, thank you for allowing me a few remarks to close off the discussions. I mean, actually, a lot of what I'd intended to say has been anticipated by the other speakers in concluding remarks. I think Waris makes a very strong point about the key here is to turn the initiatives, the policies, the laws into actual change on the ground, which is complied with. So it's this concept of implementation and accountability and dealing with impunity. So that links in both to protection of minorities and the broader problem with the Pakistan state institutions. But I also think, sort of on a positive note, I very much agree with those who have emphasized that there are literally millions of people in Pakistan who are probably appalled by discrimination and oppression of their neighbours from minority religions. And I'm sure it is also the case within the establishment and the government and the institutions in Pakistan. There are many, many people who want a better, brighter future where we don't see these sort of abusive blasphemy law cases. So I think there is cause for hope and optimism, but I do appreciate the scale of the problems. And whilst, as I said, parliamentary time is somewhat constrained by the COVID emergency at the moment, I do hope that Parliament will have more of an opportunity to discuss some of the issues that have been raised here about religious minorities and religious freedom, but also the gender issues. I think, as Rabina has absolutely validly said, are very severe. And sadly, this issue of abduction and forced marriage is not exclusive to Pakistan. So I think some further parliamentary involvement in that would, in highlighting that severe problem, would be important. And lastly, I think if I dare venture into the debate with Foreigners and Nick on a paternalistic approach, I think, to be honest, the United Kingdom government and the UK, we do have to recognise that a former colonial power, trying to get involved in these domestic issues is difficult. It comes with complications, but I think there is a way to do it. And because of the severity of the suffering that many people are experiencing as a result of the kind of problems that we've been talking about, it is important for our government to be involved with this, to be engaging with the Pakistan government through both its aid program and through international fora to try and to carve out a better future which sees real equality and equal concern and respect for everyone in Pakistan, regardless of which faith or ethnic background they come from.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you in particular for being here, for being part of this discussion. Your colleague, Mr. Lord, as well. I think it's critical that decision makers are listening and that we're engaging in dialogue with them. I'd also like to thank, of course, all of our panelists. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'd like to thank Avi UK for hosting this and putting this together, what will hopefully be the first of many to come. Nick, did you have any final words? And I think that we will wrap up.
Just to say thank you to everyone as well.
Well, thank you for everyone for being here. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. This should be available online to come. So if you have friends or colleagues who are not able to make it, please feel free to send them a link. And we hope to see you again at the next discussion.
Thank you. Bye-bye.